Look, there's no doubt that the gig economy, that the benefits that technology has brought is making our lives better. Technology is fun, it means it's fast, it's convenient, and it does make life easier for us. No one would have imagined 20 years ago that you could pick your phone up, press a button and have a meal delivered to your house quickly and cheaply. But one of the downsides of the gig economy is that workers are being left behind. There's a whole class of workers, a generation of workers, if you like, that are falling through the cracks. 25 years ago, 10% of the workforce in New South Wales was part-time or non-permanent. Now it's 1 in 3. 30% of the workforce in New South Wales is now part-time or non-permanent. These are young people who want permanent work. They can't get it. Technology's changed the face of our lives, and one of the things that we've found is that these workers have fallen through the cracks. As is often the case when there's very quick sociological or technological change, the law is left lagging way behind. At the moment, the law is lagging behind, and the people who are missing out are people like this, people who are working in the gig economy. We all take for granted that things like minimum rates of pay should be set for workers. Well, some of these young people and not so young people who work in the gig economy have no minimum rates of pay. They have no minimum rates of pay, no sick leave entitlements, no superannuation, no holiday pay, no entitlement to a holiday, and worst of all, without any explanation from their so-called bosses or employers, they can be dismissed. They don't even get a phone call. They don't get an email. They just get the plug pulled on them. So you can be a mum or a dad working 50, 60, 70 hours a week for one of these outfits, and without any explanation at all, they can remove your entire family's livelihood. That is not good enough. So we're here today to commit to a whole generation of workers in the gig economy. If I become your Premier, if Labor wins the election in a few weeks' time, we are going to make your life better and fairer. We will look after you. At the moment, no one's looking after you except the unions. We're going to help the unions by strengthening the law. We're not going to impose our beliefs on the employment system. What we'll do is to allow the independent umpire, the Industrial Relations Commission, to set fairly, after hearing from both sides of industry, what the conditions for these workers should be. Life's got to be fun, but it's also got to be fair, and we will not tolerate people being ripped off at work. Labor's mission is to make sure that working people are looked after. Today, that's exactly what we're doing. When we say a Daley Labor government will put people first, this is exactly what we mean. I might ask Adam Searle to explain the details of the package to you. Thanks, Adam.
Well, as Michael said, Labor believes that every working person should have fair, legally enforceable minimum conditions, minimum rates of pay, sick leave, annual leave, and workers' compensation when you're hurt or injured at work. At the moment, it's not clear whether these workers are or aren't employees. The networks that engage them say they're not. There is too much legal uncertainty, so a Labor government will change the industrial relations laws here in New South Wales to make sure that gig workers are defined, networks and platforms are defined, and the independent umpire is given the power to set legally enforceable minimum rates of pay and all the other conditions of work that employees take for granted here in New South Wales. Everyone who goes to work should have fair, decent and legally enforceable minimum conditions, and in this election only a Daley Labor government will deliver that for gig workers.
I might ask Mark Morey from Unions New South Wales to say a few words.
Thanks very much. Unions New South Wales welcomes this announcement today. The gig economy is a $1 billion economy in New South Wales, but innovation shouldn't be used to exploit workers. It shouldn't be used to undermine basic wages and conditions. And no matter what worker you are or what job you are, you should have certainty as to a basic set of rights and a basic set of conditions. This announcement today provides that for gig workers. It is very important and it is a historic announcement, and Unions New South Wales welcomes it.
Tony.
Good, thanks very much. And this is an extremely important campaign for and a policy that actually makes a difference for tens of thousands of workers in this state and across the country. these gig workers and food services in the rideshare industry are sacked and terminated at a moment's notice. We saw just recently 2 fatalities only a few weeks ago of 2 Uber drivers, a French national, a student in this country, a very important export earner for Australia, was killed at work. The only response he got from his gig company, after doing many months of long hours, hard work in delivering on a bicycle, was that you have no entitlement, saying to his family he has no rights, and saying to his family that we do not have any responsibility for the death of your son. A 6-line letter. Only last year, Deliveroo workers were discovering as they woke up in the morning that the company who pays them by jobs, pays them on each job they carry out, that their distances were increased, which decreased their wages and their income by between 30 and 40%, whilst already 3 out of 4 riders are getting paid below minimum wage. This is a clear wage theft, exploitation of hard-working Australians, and it's extremely important. I congratulate the Daley leadership, the Labor Party, and the next Premier of New South Wales, bringing in rights for gig workers right across the economy. This is critically needed, and of course, most importantly, I'm looking forward to hearing from the gig workers themselves.
Yeah, let's do that now. Who wants to talk? Just let them know who you are and what you do, but not who you work for.
Yep. Hi, my name's Alexander Roxburgh. I've been working in the gig economy as a delivery food rider for about 2 years now. And what we've seen is just the gradual decline of pay and rights. Well, rights have never actually been there, but at the beginning of last year, one company who offered guarantees for shifts that were worked were paid around $20 per hour. All of a sudden they thought it was okay that they no longer have to do that. So literally that's the equivalent of a person working at a retail shop, and if it's not busy, the boss can just say, well, it wasn't busy in this particular hour, so sorry mate, you're just not going to get paid. That's literally the situation that food riders are facing at the moment. So I massively welcome the work that's being done to regulate the industry at the moment. I think it's incredibly important. Again, Tony was saying last year, one company decided that they would simply just drop the pay rate per delivery by around 20 to 40%. So what I've come to understand is that the delivery companies they do not care about riders' rights, and at the moment we desperately need for this industry to be regulated.
Great, thanks, Kate. Anybody else? Sure.
My name's Ashley. I've also been doing I'm a delivery rider, and I've been doing it for some 2 years, just about now. I took on the work in the understanding it would be flexible and well paid, and I've noticed that in that 2 years, particularly in the last year, it's very much been a reversal of conditions. Not only has there been the removal of guaranteed payments for times when you simply don't have orders, i.e. some kind of insurance that you will get some money, that's gone by and large now. But over that time, I find that I have to ride pretty much double the distance to earn about 2/3 of the money that I used to. And all of this in the situation where I know that if I get sick or injured on the job, and it is a risky job, that I have no recourse, no workers' compensation in many cases, and so I'd simply have to make do with not earning any money, which is completely untenable if you're fully dependent on this work. You know?
Okay, great, thanks, Mike. All right, happy to answer questions.
To play devil's advocate here, isn't the risk that you'll drive up the price that the average person has to pay to use these types of services?
These platforms are making mega bucks. They're just not passing it on to their workers. If they're driving up prices, they're doing it and pocketing it. Some of these platforms charge the local Thai restaurant 30% of the bill just to deliver the food. So they're ripping people off, they're not paying their fair share, they're making life untenable for people like this. and we won't have any argument that these people should be not paid, that their lives should be miserable and they should be ripped off just so some offshore company that's invented some software can make a profit at their expense.
But you can't target the company, can you? They can just pass it on to the consumer.
Life's got to be fair, and these multinational companies are making big bucks. They're not passing it on to these people, they're passing it on to the consumer, and they're taking the profit instead. We want to make sure that some of the mega bucks that they're pocketing goes to the people who are working in the industry.
Does it run the risk of driving these businesses out of business?
Well, the Industrial Relations Commission will do its work and have a look at the industry as a whole and make sure that these people are treated fairly. There's never been a case in the Australian industrial landscape where treating your workers fairly and paying them what they deserve has shut down an industry. And you know, if this industry is built on ripping workers off, paying them nothing, endangering them and making sure their life is a misery, then the industry is going to have to lift its game. All we're saying is we just want fairness here. Stop? Yeah. I'll just wait till that goes. We good? Yep. Look, the beautiful notion that runs right through the middle of Australian society from coast to coast is a fair go. All we're talking about today is making sure that these mostly young people who go to work get a fair go. End of story.
Is there any money attached to this policy, or is it just legislative change?
Better to talk about that.
It's legislative change. It's to change the legal framework to make sure that all workers, gig workers, have legally enforceable minimum rates of pay. As Michael said, it's about fairness. Every employee has a legally enforceable minimum rate of pay, but these workers do not have any minimum rate of pay, and as we've heard, the pay can be cut at the whim of the company just because they feel like it. This is all we are doing here is allowing the Industrial Relations Commission, an independent body, to set a fair minimum rate of pay and to give these workers the same rights that employees have. And employees that work in retail and fast food, they're not paid the riches of the earth. The minimum rates of pay are modest. The Commission obviously will set sensible minimum rates of pay, but the important thing is that there is a minimum that is legally enforceable, and that these workers have rights like annual and sick leave, that they get superannuation for their retirement, and that when they're injured, they actually get looked after. We heard from one of the writers today about getting injured and having no rights. Now, in 21st century Australia, is that fair? Is that reasonable? Is that even sustainable? We say that it's not, and that everyone should have the same minimum legal rights.
Can you just expand on that for a second? Is the current situation that the Industrial Relations Commission can't act in this space?
Correct.
They have no power.
They have no power. There is simply no regulatory framework for the Commission to set minimum rates of pay or other conditions for these workers. If they were employees, they'd be caught by the federal system, but these businesses say they're not employees. Well, we're going to take them at their word, and we're going to provide a new set of regulation that gives gig workers a fair go.
So you would need to pass legislation
Correct.
giving the
Yes.
Commission powers to look in this space?
Yes, we will put a law to Parliament, and we will invite the Parliament to do the right thing by these young and other vulnerable workers.
It's a pretty big task to set up a whole regulatory framework, and even really new contracts will have to be drawn up for anyone who works in this industry. Could there potentially be issues with people who currently do contract work or freelance work that could increasing minimum like wages for gig economy workers? Could that bring down wages for other people in other areas?
I don't believe that will be the case. We're talking about businesses that by and large are very profitable, many of them registered overseas. This is simply about saying we're not going to interfere with your business, we're just going to require that you pay your workers a fair minimum rate of pay and give them what other employees are entitled to. In 21st century Australia, it is not sustainable to say we should have a growing cohort of workers who have literally no legal rights, that they get just what the business wants to give them day by day, shift by shift. People can't get loans, they can't buy homes, they can't even get rental properties, they can't raise a family in those situations. And it's a growing part of the workforce, and all we're saying is that because this is a result of changes in society and technology, the law simply needs to keep up.
Does that mean there needs to be a new legal definition of what a gig economy worker actually is?
Yes, in the legislation we will define what a gig worker is, we will define what a network or a platform is, and we will empower the Commission to act accordingly. There's already a template in the industrial relations legislation in Chapter 6 that covers the transport industry. It's not creating something completely from scratch, it's applying existing concepts to this new situation.
Have you had any discussions with Uber or Deliveroo before announcing this today?
No. I've had discussions with them in the past about the need for workers to have minimum rates of pay. They obviously have a different view. They seem to think that all of their workers are well looked after. They say their workers are covered for workers' compensation, but no, I certainly haven't seen whatever insurance documents they rely upon. And as we've heard here today, with those 2 fatalities, that is very much in doubt. We're not seeking to impose something unsustainable on businesses that are emerging as a result of new technology. We're just saying treat workers fairly, and that all workers should have a baseline of minimum legal rights. In 21st century Australia, this should not be a big ask.
Just to be clear, so currently workers in the gig economy, they can't at all access any kind of insurance or rebates or pay that are currently available to contractors or freelance workers. They don't fit into either of those categories already.
Freelance workers, contractors, it's just whatever is in the contract agreed between the worker and the company engaging them. There's no legal regulation that sets minimum pay and conditions for people who are not employees in this situation. So the law has simply failed to keep up with changes in society and changes in technology, and we're just simply taking concepts and arrangements that apply to employees and saying this cohort of workers should be treated no less. They should have the same rights and conditions. A minimum rate of hourly pay, the right to sick leave and annual leave, the right to superannuation, and if you're injured, the rights to workers' compensation. I mean, innovation should not come at the cost of exploitation. Apps should not be the digital version of the Hungry Mile from the late 19th and early 20th century.
But just to be clear, you're just going to empower the Commission to
set minimum pay and conditions.
And to mandate that they set sick leave and that.
Yes, all of those things that an employee gets, the Commission will be empowered to determine for gig workers what minimum conditions they should have in this area.
So the Commission may determine that they're not entitled to sick pay?
No, the Commission will be setting the rates of sick pay, the rates of annual leave. They will be setting the rates, but the Commission will be required to set minimum conditions in each of these areas where employees get those rights and entitlements.
Do you have any idea about what the minimum pay rate will be or could be?
As I said, if you look at workers in retail and fast food, they're even the maximum under those awards are very, very modest. So we're not talking about the riches of the earth, we're just talking about fairness.
Can I just ask the workers, what is the rate of pay at the moment?
I find it's quite variable. If you're working in the early part of the week doing lunch, even in quite busy suburbs of Sydney, you'll be lucky to sometimes get more than 1 or 2 deliveries an hour, which equates to about $8 to $10 an hour.
$8 to $10 an hour.
Correct, yeah.
Is there an average?
This is the other thing, perhaps the transparency in the companies. There was a time late last year where one of them introduced a new distance-based fee system and alleged that we're all earning more money, and yet there's a very big social network on WhatsApp, for example, that's collectively all the riders, and hardly any of them could attest to this alleged increase. So, to be honest, it's decreased in the last 2 years, and I don't imagine that there's fewer people ordering food. I think everyone's quite time poor.
$8 is
It is. That's the thing. And actually, at that time that they introduced these distance-based fees, you actually ended up signing a new contract, albeit digitally, and that actually had no minimum standard, or at least the previous ones you were guaranteed a certain minimum of pay per an hour, or per an order at least. Okay, but now that's no longer in place. So technically, they could change it to $2 an hour, or a delivery or whatever. There's no minimum. But I think, as one worker has rightly pointed out, that contract might even be invalid because it doesn't involve any form of offer and acceptance. I mean, for this kind of contract work, you expect to be given a minimum set of conditions, and that's just not even provided for.
Just to play devil's advocate, sorry, look, the companies often say, well, workers know what they're signing up to. They get sent a contract, they can see their rates of pay and what they need to do. So they're saying workers agree to these conditions.
I'm sure they do.
So why are they complaining about it? What do you say to those comments?
Okay, well, I'd say that these people who are agreeing to the conditions, like myself and others, are normal, regular people who have normal expenses to pay, normal rent to pay, and normal rights to work. And so we kind of accept that, because we're in a modern civilised society, that undertaking these jobs, there'll inherently be some basic kind of protections. So if they weren't there at the start, we certainly believe they would develop. And at the end of the day, I think it's fair to say that everyone needs to, rents in Sydney are outrageous. So we have to meet the cost of living. So we do what we need to do.
Well, just on that, it's about bargaining power. These workers are individuals. Even though they're members of the union, they don't have bargaining power. If you're an employee, an independent body has set a legal minimum rate of pay that employers and workers cannot walk away from. And as we've heard, these workers have no legal minimum, and those rates are varied and cut at the whim of the business. That's not acceptable. They have rent to pay here in Sydney, which is very high, food, families to look after, lives to lead. What we're talking about here is setting legal minimums. In 21st century Australia, that should not be a big ask.